everyone back to this is the fourth and final day of this meeting series for the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine's Marine Carbon Dioxide Removal Standing Committee. My name is Kelly Oskvig. I'm a Senior Program Officer with the National Academies here in DC, Washington, DC, and I'm serving as the staff lead for this activity. So please note that this is a public meeting. It's being recorded, and the recording will be posted on our website in a few days' time. And if you're joining us for the first time, you can find out more information about this project on our website, which Safa will put in the chat momentarily. And you can also view the recording from our first meeting for additional project details. We'll put the direct link to that in here as well. So next slide. We've had a handful of extremely informative meetings this week. So starting with some of the framing, we had some talks on the ocean's role in climate mitigation, a discussion on where we are with monitoring, reporting, and verification of carbon removal, and a series of lightning talks on recent advances across many different approaches in MCDR. We then delved into discussions on governance, including policy, permitting, and social perceptions. Yesterday, we learned a little bit more about some of the recent field trials happening and what specifically has been learned in terms of successful development and execution of those field trials. And then today, we'll close the series of meetings with a discussion on current efforts, challenges, and future plans for MCDR happening around the world. And we also have a pre-recorded lightning talk from Peter McCready on what's new in the world of coastal blue carbon. As I said, we've had a very busy agenda, and we couldn't squeeze it in on the first day. So please stay tuned for that. Next slide. So today we're very pleased to have Helen Finley, Nanju Zhao, and Chris Pierce online. Each will provide 10 minutes of an overview. This will be followed by questions and answers after all three have spoken. We'll use the raised hand function to ask questions, but also feel free to use the Zoom chat to ask questions, answer questions, or send comments. Around 1:10 p.m. Eastern, we'll wrap this up and then show a pre-recorded talk from Phil Boyd with the University of Tasmania to finish up this session on global efforts, and that'll be followed by a 5-minute pre-recording from Peter McCready on coastal blue carbon. Since they aren't able to be here, the committee will then follow up with any questions via email. So without further ado, Helen, you are first. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'll just share my slides. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be invited to come and speak to you today. So thank you very much for that. Hopefully you can see my presentation okay?
Looks good.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so my name is Helen Finley. I'm from Plymouth Marine Laboratory over in the UK. And I'm here to speak to you primarily based around the Global Oceanification Observing Network Perspectives paper that we recently published. In fact, it just came out last week in Oceanography, because I am the chair for the Marine Carbon Dioxide Removal Working Group of GOAN. And we felt that it was a useful opportunity to contribute our knowledge and think about where ocean acidification research can feed into MCDR. So I'm going to give you a little bit of introduction to that and some of the other work actually that we're involved with outside of GOAN as well. So for those that are not aware, GOAN is a global network that has been working since 2012. We now have over 1,200 members in our network from over 114 different countries. And we work as a global network, but we actually have regional hubs now as well. So there are 11 regional hubs that mean that we can operate globally in sharing that knowledge, but actually answer regional questions and look at regional issues that are maybe different between different locations and come together as those regional hubs to kind of answer those specific questions. So the MCDR working group was formed 2 years ago now. We've been active, and it was really in the, as MCDR space was kind of growing, we thought that the ocean acidification community needed some way of connecting and feeding into that discussion as it moved forward. So the GOAN has 3 working groups: the biology working group, the MCDR working group, and a capacity building sharing working group. So we aim to really kind of think about how we can standardize carbonate parameters, thinking about data quality, best practices, guidelines, data analysis, these sort of big questions that are actually really useful for MCDR as well, and thinking about how we can apply that and share that with the wider MCDR community. And actually, I have to say, a lot of the MCDR community, and certainly in the research field, is primarily actually built up from the community that's either been working on carbon cycling or ocean acidification over the last couple of decades anyway, as I'm sure you're familiar with. So it's a really nice way of just being able to showcase that knowledge and information. So I won't go into too much detail about the paper itself, other than just raise a couple of comments. We don't really have time to go into detail. But what we tried to do with the paper was to go through each of the goals of Go On, which I'll do briefly here, and think about how we can learn from what we know from the past 2 decades worth of research in this field and apply that to MCDR for recommendations for how perhaps we can move forward in that space. So the first goal is goal 1 was to be able to observe changing carbonate chemistry specifically for oceanification, but actually obviously that has multiple uses for carbon cycle generally, but also then thinking about MCDR in that space. So some of the recommendations we came out with were things like making use of already available data. And this is just an example here. There's the map here on the top on the right, which is the data explorer that Go On has on its website. And you can go in there and explore where people are taking measurements and what measurements they're making, how they're making them, how frequently, things like that. And comparing that to something like the geoengineering map, which is a map that shows where different activities are taking place. And actually, even just that first step of thinking about where those different processes, different activities are happening is really useful to kind of understand, are we monitoring in the right places? Have we got that background data? Is that useful for monitoring, verification, reporting? Is it useful for that kind of background information that I need when I think about MCDR moving forward? Is that data already available? So acknowledging that those sort of data sets already exist, and there's it's not just the oceanification community, there's a huge carbon community out there that has been gathering these data. But also acknowledging that achieving this kind of high quality data is actually quite difficult and requires highly skilled practitioners, which we need to invest in and make sure that we are able to continue to invest in sustainable, low-cost, accessible tools, as well as human resources to continue that sort of monitoring. So those are the sort of things for goal 1 that we were thinking about. For goal 2, this is about biological and ecosystem societal impacts from ocean acidification and changing carbonate chemistry. So there's a lot of information there about things like which species are probably going to be most sensitive to changes in chemistry, which are the vulnerable species, are there thresholds that we can already establish from that ocean acidification knowledge, and how can we kind of make use of that for environmental impact assessments and societal acceptance of some of these techniques and technologies? Are there biological indicators that we can develop together, for example, with the oceanification and MCDR applications both in mind? And encouraging kind of chemists and biologists to look at where they can co-locate those measurements to actually think about how best to look at environmental impact assessments moving forward. Goal 3 is about data collection for modeling and forecasting. And so these were the sort of recommendations really that feed a lot into the monitoring, verification and reporting for MCDR. So thinking about how can we make use of the models that have already been developed for the carbonate chemistry in the oceanification world. There's a lot of work been done in trying to better understand how carbonate chemistry changes in models and how we can better represent those. But there's also a lot of data visualization that's been recently taken place in the oceanification space. For example, there's tools now that make use of artificial intelligence to map carbonate chemistry through time across the whole global scale. We can use satellites to kind of implement some of those algorithms, and we can actually kind of start to think about monthly, if not higher resolution, data sets that are available to better understand and model and forecast the changing carbonate chemistry. So those kind of all feed into MCDR in different ways, and you can explore that more in the paper. It is a network, and so we do capacity building as well. So I think we also wanted to make sure that we highlighted that capacity building was really important, and leveraging the existing networks that are available. Just to say that we have Ocean Acidification Week every year. The next one is coming up the week of the 13th of October, and there will be an MCDR session on that, and we will have someone representing our paper on that as well. I just wanted to move briefly on to some ICES related efforts, talking about other global initiatives that are ongoing. And I know that we've got the ONCE program after this, which started, I believe, was maybe as an ICES Pisces working group. So that'd be really interesting to hear from next. But we have been working together with a number of people that are kind of bridging the Go On space with some non-MCDR Go On communities to try and actually think about how MCDR interacts with fisheries and aquaculture. This was something that we recognized hadn't really been dealt with very much in this space yet. So we held a workshop last September, and then an in-person write-out workshop in April 2025. And this is really to kind of bring to the table practitioners from other communities that maybe aren't well have a voice yet in this space, because actually when you look at the environmental impacts, a lot of those are going to go beyond kind of the plankton experiments that have been already done, and there's not really much on in terms of higher trophic levels, but actually also thinking about holistic ecosystem management of systems requires input from all of these different types of ecosystem, fisheries, aquaculture type of communities as well. So we have a themed set with ICES, which is open at the moment and will close in February. And these lists here, I won't go through them all, but I think these slides are available afterwards. So these 11 papers are in preparation at the moment. So they range from everything kind of the state of the knowledge in terms of impacts to marine ecosystems, fisheries and aquaculture, through to kind of addressing rights holders and Indigenous engagement, through to blue carbon and MCDR interactions, policy, lessons learned from other different industry activities in this space, and explainers for policy makers and the public. So look out for those over the next 6 months or 6 to 9 months of, hopefully will be coming out in that period. We recently submitted our project for a UN Ocean Decade endorsement, and we're hoping to become a formal ICES working group in January, and potentially looking to expand that to Pisces as well, depending on how we get it on in the Atlantic space, first of all. So I realize I'm running out of time, so I just really wanted to finish by saying that some of the challenges, thinking with the Go On hat on, is things like funding. I think would be really useful to have kind of international coordinated funding. So it's great that there's national funding, especially the kind of the US, Europe, UK, for certain aspects of MCDR, but I think given that the space we're moving into is going to require international regulations and international partners, it would be great to see some international coordinated funding available. Regulations, I'm sure you've heard lots about this week, so I won't really talk too much about that. But I think the other challenging thing from our perspective, especially when we've been communicating this type of information to non-MCDR practitioners, is really about trying to understand scale of deployment. And I think that is a really important thing for the MCDR research community to try and start to embrace a bit more. I know people are working on it and we've come a long way with that, but what does that really look like? Is it like a national pot that you can kind of pool, like I'm going to do some direct ocean capture here, and I'm going to do some OAE here in my national space. For your nationally determined contributions, can you include some of those? How does that really look for those policymakers, for people that are actually deciding how they're going to manage that space nationally? But then also we're going to think about international large-scale deployment if we're talking about really large-scale stuff, then it's going to be happening in the high seas, and we need to be looking at understanding where those different deployment activities are going to take place and how they're going to take place, so that we can then apply this holistic ecosystem-based monitoring and planning aspects to it. And that kind of then leads to this final point that we need to better understand the implications, but really beyond just kind of the impacts to plankton or a specific species, what are the implications to ecosystems and societies that are working in this space? So I'm going to end there. Thank you very much. Look forward to having a discussion about this after the presentations. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Helen. And those papers sound like they'll be a really valuable resource to the committee. So we look forward to seeing those in 6 to 9 months. So next we have Nyanju.
Okay, I will share my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen? Can you hear
yes,
me?
It's,
okay, great.
We can hear you. It's not in presentation mode yet.
Okay, yeah. Let me
Okay.
Great. Okay. Hello everyone. I'm very much honored to be speaking here. I'm gonna introduce a little bit about the UN international program called Ocean Negative Carbon Emissions, or ONES in short. The term negative emission is actually opposite word of emission. That means when the carbon flux of negative emission equals the current flux of emission, we're gonna reach carbon neutral. And this program, I mean ONES program, was designed toward the UN SDGs number 13, number 14, and 17. And we have 5 missions, including innovative research, construction of infrastructures and facilities, and on-site demonstration, and also international exchange like this, and education and science popularization.
Nyanju, I can't hear you right now.
Lost video also.
Nyanju, if you can hear us, we can't hear you or see your screen anymore. We might have to
Would you like me to?
circle back. Yeah, Chris, do you want to go ahead and go, and then hopefully he can get logged back in.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, can you hear me now?
Are you back, Nyanju? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay,
I don't.
So can I continue?
Yes, you just need to reshare your slides.
Okay, from the beginning or where I stopped?
No.
Maybe from here.
You're a few slides in.
The 4 carbon pumps. Is it here? It was here?
I don't see your screen yet.
Oh, really? Let me share screen again. This is terrible.
Okay.
Okay.
It's okay. These things happen.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Problem. It's not okay?
Yeah, I see your screen. And I think you can start with, yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah. Let me start from here, from the theory, the carbon sequestration mechanisms. I mean, the ONES approach is based on their combined carbon pumps, including biological carbon pump, or BCP in short, and a carbon counter pump, CCP, as well as the microbial carbon pump, MCP, and ultimately also solubility carbon pump, SCP. Let me block. Okay, so among those carbon pumps, the MCP is a relatively new one. it's really different from the other 3 pumps. It's not really depending on the depth. It can take in place anywhere, any depth in the water column. And it got a fundamental differences from the classical biological pump in terms of carbon sequestration mechanism, carbon storage process, and dominant organisms, and also climate effects as well as historical contributions. I don't have time to go through the details, but if anyone interested in this point, we can talk after the meeting. And the MCP actually existing not only in marine environments, but also on the terrestrial environments. Actually, the terrestrial scientists work out a soil MCP, and it got published after 5 years. 5 years after we proposed the MCP in the ocean. And if you look at the citation of the soil MCP here, you will find the trend of the citation rate is much sharper than the MCP in the ocean. So that means MCP is really existing everywhere. And now we are trying to get the soil MCP and the MCP in the ocean integrated for better understanding of the carbon cycling and the carbon sequestration in other environments. And we believe there is in the marine side, there are interactions and synergistic effects of all the carbon pumps, like this here. And if we understand their processes and mechanisms, and if we can harness or control the boundary conditions, we could reach maximum outputs of carbon sequestration in the form of organic, inorganic, living, non-living, dissolved, and particular forms. So like this. You may ask me, do you have any evidence? The answer is yes. You can look at the blank rocks. If you take a piece of the rocks and look at it under a microscopy, you will find this blacks was actually induced by the microbes. And you can also test it out in the lab. Under the microscopy, you can see these rocks are induced by the microbial cells. And this way, you could control some condition, boundary conditions, to turn the carbon as a counterpump to be a positive one. I mean, release less CO2 while they get precipitation or carbonates. Then let me show you the integrated advanced approaches for potential-based practice. Case number 1, we can call it integrated land and ocean eco-engineering by reduced fertilization of the land to increase carbon sequestration in the ocean. I don't have time to go through the details, but let me show you the approach first. This is approach number 1. Number 2, seaweed farming. This is easy to be understood, so I don't have to spend time, but I would like to show you some other eco-engineering, like artificial upwelling driven by clean energy, like this here, wave energy, and also solar energy, wind energy, etc. And in the this can be applied. I mean, the artificial upwelling can be applied in the sea farming area, which is already intervened area. So that's legal. And this diagram show you the BCM's approaches. Like here, started from the upwelling, bring high nutrients from the deep water to the surface water. Then it can expect a higher carbon fixation and carbon sequestration. And then followed by the BCP and also MCP, because there's lots of dissolved iron carbon from the seaweeds in that case, and which can also be a small nuclei for aggregation of the other DOC molecules. And if you worry about the eutrophication because of the upwelling, we do have some measures like the hydroxyl radical. It can kill the cells. I mean, break down their DNA, but leave the cells intact. So then there's no much pollution, but you can get the cells to be aggregated for sinking down to the bottom for burial. And if you want to speed up this process, you could also apply clean or alkaline minerals like olive oil. And that can also make the carbonate counterpart to be a positive one. All these processes will enhance the total amount of carbon sequestered by the processes. That's down the farming area. So it's legal. This really can reach twin goals. I mean, enhancement of carbon sink and also remediation of the ecosystems. This is a kind of a good example for application of the BCMs. And BCMs also stand for business continuity management systems. Now this is, then you can see it's a smart approach. And smart also can be the initials of this word: specific, manageable, achievable, realistic, and transparent. So this really can be a potential best practice. And also, we could apply MCP and also CCP in the wastewater treatment plants. We know the wastewater treatment plants are all sources of CO2. And we could turn it upside down, I mean, to make it from a source to a sink of the CO2. And meanwhile, it can make, carbon sink for carbon trading, because this is by anthropogenic process. It's not a natural, so that can put on the carbon trading market. So this is a good idea. And the test, the preliminary test show us it's really working. And during this process, this test, we also proposed some proposal for change the current policy. I mean, the current standards in wastewater influent is better the pH value. I mean, the current standard for the lower limit of a pH in the effluent is 6, which is much below the pH value of the seawater, which is still about 8, even if we call it ocean acidification. So you can imagine by the 2 units difference, it can cause a really big difference in terms of the hydrogen ion concentration. Just about 150 times difference. You can imagine how much the impacts of this difference on a biota. So we need to change the policy, change the standard of pH in the influence of wastewater treatment plants. So that was proposed to the STI, to the UN STI forum 2 months ago. And it was published as a policy brief already. Now this way we can really link science to policy and make policy work for science, and then promote science serves the society. And we already got approved by the ISO for international working group for WANS and carbon neutralization. ISO means International Standardization Organization. So this is a good platform for people to work out some international standard. So then we develop the theory to method to protocols and to standard, I mean international standard. Then people can follow your protocol to work everywhere possible in the world. Finally, I would like to share with you about WANS vision, which is called triple real. The real words 4 letters here. I can show you. Triple R means triple R for WANS approaches. That means the approaches are realistic, reliable, and reproducible. Triple E for implementation, ecological, ethic, and with equity. Triple A for WANS objectives, ambitious, actionable, and achievable. And triple L for WANS governance, legal, by learning protocol, and with reliability. Okay, with this, I would stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. That was a lot to squeeze into 10 minutes and a lot of great work. We really appreciate you sharing that, and I imagine that just stirred some great discussion to follow. But before we get there, we've got Chris Pierce, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Chris, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Okay. Hopefully we're in full screen mode.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, good. Okay, well, thank you ever so much for the invitation to join you today. I'm delighted to be here to present some of the work we've been doing, both through the CO2 CDR project, as per the early introduction, but also more broadly work that we're doing at the NOC in the UK. I think kind of the UK is perhaps most famous for the Marine CDR trial that never happened. This was the initial proposed trial led by Planetary in Cornwall. That didn't proceed, not for scientific reasons. The resulting report did highlight that it was actually scientifically sound. There's no problems with what was being proposed to be done, but it was actually more about the level of community engagement that happened or didn't happen in advance of that trial. And it's given us a lot of lessons learned for the sector in general, and is continuing to be followed up on. So it's definitely not a less learned or wasted effort. It's certainly still giving us guidance on how to proceed. The UK does also have a active project or a trial that's giving us information around direct ocean carbon capture and storage or direct ocean removal. This is a CECURE project led by the University of Exeter, Paul Halloran, as well as colleagues at PML. And that is the only UK government supported or funded project that has been happening in this space at this current time. So there's a couple of activities that we've been doing, not so much perhaps as elsewhere in the world, but we are starting to show interest. And this is sort of demonstrating there's a real need for further research and guidance for the regulatory implementation of these activities. In that regard, the NOC is not there to innovate or apply these approaches. We are very much on the side of evaluating and assessing what their impacts could be, what their efficacy could be, whether they are considered viable in terms of supporting the UK's net zero strategies and helping to remove atmospheric carbon dioxide removal, and also facilitating the exchange of information regarding that. So essentially making sure that policymakers, member of the public, IPCC boards and representatives have the information that they need to evaluate if or how and where and when marine CDR could be used to support climate mitigation strategies. I'm not going to go into detail about all the types of activities we've been doing. I am going to sort of highlight, in the interest of time, some of the key projects that we've been working on and are contributing to, starting with the CO2 CDR programme. So that is the strategies for the evaluation and assessment of ocean-based CDR. It's a Horizon Europe funded project that's scientifically led by myself and the NOC, and involves 14 different partners across the EU. Our aim, very much aligned with that of NOx, unsurprisingly, is to evaluate and assess CDR approaches to really help understand if or where they might be environmentally safe or economically viable and socially acceptable. So we're not there to innovate or advocate for any approaches, or conversely, not to try and say that they shouldn't be proceeding. It's all about getting the understanding and bringing together the different communities who are working in this space to understand where and how and if marine CDR could be part of that portfolio. We're doing that through three core themes. Theme one, shown there on the green, is really the sort of scientific and technical side of things, with Phil Renforth and colleagues and Leiden looking at the life cycle assessment and techno-economic assessments, and I'll talk about that briefly in a second. And Socrates Vassilides and colleagues at NOC looking more at the MRV, monitoring, reporting, verification challenges, together with Andreas Oschilies and colleagues at GEOMAR. On the governance side, we have an array of institutes, including IFW in Kiel, a case in Poland, and Lewis in Italy, as well as the World Ocean Council, supporting our understanding of different governance frameworks, approaches, what public perceptions are towards those, and as well as potential industrial needs in that sector, the market needs. And finally, in our third core theme, which is the integration pathways, is very much about what is needed to take this to scale, what the kind of implementation logistics required, how do we represent marine CDR in integrated assessment models, can we do that, and how do we sort of support that advancements, and how do we sort of just take this sector forward in a viable manner. And that's work being led through IDIV and in Germany and Kiel, as well as colleagues in Madrid as well. Apologies to anyone I've forgotten. In terms of work we've been doing through this project so far, as I kind of mentioned, we've been doing the Royal We, Phil and his colleagues, Callum Ward, as well as those in Leiden, have been looking at techno-economic assessment analysis, really developing conceptual structures, building on other work they've been doing with Carbon to Sea, sort of unifying the approaches for evaluating the requirements for marine CDR and looking at improving the sort of the net zero, the CDR requirements, energy requirements, and enhancing our understanding if and where this could be implemented and what the requirements would be for doing this at scale down the line. In terms of the governance requirements, we have these communities of practice that are being established. Something you may have heard of recently is the Carbon Business Council's Marine CDR Coalition. That's actually sort of come about through combining the industry association established by the World Ocean Council through the CO2 CDR project. So it's a great success to see there's a unified portal for us, particularly as an academic sector, to try and contact and understand what the shared needs are of the commercial implementers of marine CDR technologies, truly trying to understand what they see as their barrier to implementation, what they're doing to tackle them, and how we as a scientific community can ensure that they and the regulatory bodies and markets have the information needed to evaluate if or what is needed to take this up forwards. And from the implementation side, just an example of work that's recently come out from Frank Meisel and his colleagues in Kiel. This is looking at the logistical requirements for, in this instance, at-sea ocean alkalinity enhancement off the coast of Norway. So really kind of looking at the shipping rates, the rates, consideration of the rates of deployment, how fast the ships need to move, how much of an area they can disperse the material over to maintain the sort of pH threshold limits. So they're kind of really sort of going into some of the scientific technicalities as well as the logistical material energy usage and shipments to really enhance our understanding of how much of a component this could play in reducing CO2. Where we want to get with this work is to really kind of improve our understanding and availability of mechanisms and guidelines required to evaluate marine CDR. There are obviously a lot of frameworks already existing out there, and we are trying to support them, but not by duplicating efforts, but really sort of trying to bring them together to give us a sense of what the different evaluation criteria are. Unsurprisingly, this aligns with our core themes, with some of the scientific and technological aspects, the governance aspects and the implementation pathways, as well as market considerations. We're not trying to do our own field trials or understand our advancement of efficacy and durability. You know, many colleagues on this call and others throughout the field are doing that excellent work. Really, we're trying to say this is what's needed, bring the different people together and really ensure that we have a clear understanding of how to progress it forwards in the most successful manner, because we have to recognize that time is limited to get carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere in the most viable approaches. And that's kind of highlighted in this sort of ultimate goal at the bottom, and the sort of key takeaway that I think has already been highlighted by Helen earlier, is that communication and open collaboration is going to be essential for using the time and the resources and the trials activities that we already have going, ensuring that the scientific, commercial, regulatory sectors are all working together to make this sector work. Moving on briefly to some of the other projects that we're doing at the NOC, starting with Atlantis. This is one of the UK's national capability programs. So it's a sort of a nationally funded marine science capability program. One of the research teams within it, and that there are multiple components to this, so this is only one small sector, is looking at ocean-based climate mitigation strategies. And this is split into various different components, sort of summarized graphically on the right-hand side. We have sustained observatories, such as the Porcupine Abyssal Plain, where we have these long-term records, and we want to better understand how we can use them to provide baselines against which any future implementation could be assessed against, very much along the lines of the observation networks that go on that Helen was referring to earlier. And we're also looking at models and where we can, applying our technologies to existing field trials or analog sites to improve our understanding of our capabilities to monitor, report and verify future interventions in this space. In addition to that, we're developing and enhancing our sensor capabilities. This will require integration of in situ sensors with the marine system models. We're aware of that. So what platforms do we have that will work in that space? And of course, a critical component of our work is ensuring that the information we have is getting through to national and international bodies. So we support the UK's National Climate Science Partnership. Both myself and Helen actually are a part of the Climate Interventions Working Group supporting these types of assessments, and colleagues sit on the European Marine Board's MCDR working group. So very much a part of those national and European-based discussions. Another project I want to briefly highlight is the Ocean Vision's funded MCDR Environmental Impact Assessment Framework. This is a new project. It started a couple of months ago, so there's not too much data or highlights to show. I just want to highlight that this is being led by Fugro and Integral Consultings, with NOC supporting that. It's very much going to be a community-led effort, with Fugro currently bringing their expertise from the wider marine sector and doing environmental impact assessments for other marine-based applications, and then translating that knowledge and expertise into the marine CDR space. So we can have this cohesive, open and comprehensive framework for environmental impact assessments in the MCDR space. At present, that knowledge is being collated and being transferred into the marine CDR space, and then that will be shared in the new year for wider evaluation and engagement. So please do sign up to the mailing list as a QR code, and I'll flag that back up at the end if you want to engage with that process or want further information about it. And we will be running a town hall on EIAs for marine CDR at the forthcoming AGU meeting in Glasgow next year. So again, so something to watch this space for. Another project that is in the pipeline, I would say, we started some work with the University of the West Indies in Barbados and Seafields, looking at the impacts of macroalgae or seaweed deposition. This is a big issue in the Caribbean, as well as the west coast of Africa and across a tropical North Atlantic, as well as elsewhere. As Anjum was just proposing or highlighting, seaweeds can be used, cultivated and deposited as a potential biological MCDR approach. Particularly in the Caribbean, where there's these huge inundations, as shown in the photo on the top left there. You know, this can be a hazard, human health hazard. It needs to be disposed of. So we need to evaluate if deep sea deposition could be part of that solution. We know that degradation will occur. We just don't know the rates, particularly in the deep marine environments, and what the impacts of enhanced deposition would be. So this is something we need to evaluate. We've done some preliminary work with the crews, with colleagues from Seafields and the University of the West Indies. So we need to take this further with some very small scale trials, I think, just to really better understand the rates of degradation and what the impacts would be on local oxygen consumption and so forth. So this is work we've proposed to do with the University of Cambridge and the Scottish Association of Marine Science and the University of Southampton. So hopefully that's something we can take further forward in the near future. Probably rapidly running out of time, so I'm just going to highlight a couple other projects, because NOC is not alone in working in this space, and the CO2 CDR is not the only European marine CDR project. So we do have a sister project, Uptake, that's also considering marine CDR approaches, certainly ocean alkalinity enhancement, and Rescue is another EU Horizon Europe funded project that's looking at running marine CDR model in comparison exercises. So that's two big active projects funded by Horizon Europe. And of course, OceanNet's recently finished, and that was very much a precursor to CO2 CDR, and has published a lot of fantastic evidence, and you can now find their synthesis report available through their website. Finally, Germany is obviously also very active in this space and has the CDR MARE network and lots of activities within that. And again, Helen's already highlighted this. There will be more European activities in the near future. The call was closed on Tuesday this week, so hopefully at some point next year there'll be two new projects, one particularly looking at ocean alkalinity enhancement and another looking at monitoring of marine CDR techniques. So watch this space. To close, we were asked to sort of think about the opportunities in the near future for marine CDR in our region, as well as concerns and critical next steps. I think it's fair to say that the ocean will be playing a critical role in CDR, whether actively through the implementation of marine CDR approaches or passively through the byproduct of CO2 being extracted elsewhere, or through activities such as enhanced rock weathering on land that will actively encourage the transport of bicarbonate into marine spaces. So we need to understand what those impacts will be on the marine environments. And at this point in time, the uncertainties, both scientific and socioeconomic, are prohibiting these deployments at climatically and commercially significant scales. So we need to conduct in the near term small-scale, controlled in situ assessments and for better understanding what they could do in the future. We also need to consider communication. Again, this is a point I highlighted before, and it echoes that made by Helen. We need to bring all parties together. This is not something that can be done in isolation, particularly now that MCDR has been sort of gathered mainstream marine scientific community interest. Work needs to be done to ensure that as scientists, we work together and understand what commercial entities and regulators are looking to see, as well as members of the public, what their concerns are, and ensure that our science is applied and conducted in the right way, recognizing the need to do CDR. And finally, here in the UK, we and colleagues have the capabilities to do this. We just don't have the funding. There is a critical need for independent funding to take this type of activities forwards. The EU calls forthcoming are fantastic examples of European-based funding, but there is a need for greater local, national, and international collaboration in that space. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. There's a few highlight slides there, but we're happy to go to questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Chris. And thanks to all our panelists for giving us those great overviews of all this work going on between the presentations today and what we've heard over the last few days. It's been a bright light in the week or the month or the year, all three. So we have plenty of time for questions now. Feel free to ask a question to all three, or you can target to one of our speakers. Just use the raise hand function. I'll also try and monitor the chat. And the first hand I see is Sarah Frias-Torres.
Hi, hello. Let me just. Okay, so I've been asking this question every chance I get, but can we please have a frank conversation about the fiasco of Running Tide, which is linked to seaweed sinking? Because unless we address the problems that happen, I don't see any future in the area of seaweed sinking and in marine carbon CDR at large because of all the mistakes that happen there. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I can briefly explain what it is, but we need to address this giant elephant in the room.
Yeah, I am aware of Running Tide. I think I've just seen the chat, so yeah, there's some questions directed at me. Just to be crystal clear here, the research that needs to be done about marine seaweed sequestration is to better understand what the impacts would be. I'm not going to sit here and advocate for what Running Tide did off the coast of Iceland, or the circumstances that led up to that, and I'm not privy to all the information. However, what I can say is there is a critical need at this point in time for managing sargassum in the Caribbean region. Deposition of sargassum is currently being conducted by some countries without evaluating what effects that could be on the deep sea environments. As scientists, we need to provide independent information to the regulatory bodies, i.e. the local governments, what effect that would have on their deep sea environments. That information can then be used by those national bodies to understand if they wish to proceed with the deposition of sargassum or other seaweeds as part of their CDR approach. So I'm not going to advocate for what Running Tide did or didn't do, or what other entities are looking to do. That's not my function. My function is to provide the scientific information on which regulatory bodies can decide, as well as companies, as well as members of the public, as well as other scientists, on which we can decide, is this an approach we wish to be considering? Okay, and I think the Running Tide discussion did get pushed to another boundary because of the other actions that they took that were not supported by scientific information.
Okay. As a scientist, as an oceanographer and marine ecologist, here's the one missing link in all these conversations. We do not have evidence, strong scientific evidence, that whatever seaweed you sink into the deep sea, that carbon gets fully sequestered. That evidence is not there.
I agree.
Okay, so I'm just sharing this with the group at large, that let's remember that whenever we go through this path of carbon marine CDR, in this case, seaweed removal, whatever kind of seaweed you work on, but any other cases, let's be clear on where is the scientific evidence for each step. So the biggest problem I see with the sargassum, and I'm very familiar with the sargassum in the Caribbean. I've studied the sargassum ecosystem at length, so I know what I'm talking about. So when we talk about all these advising governments and founding new companies or whatever it is that we want to do, let's be clear of where the gaps in knowledge are. And this is a giant gap we have when it comes to seaweed. And I see people going into these conversations and selling carbon credits and founding these companies without a solid understanding how the ocean ecosystem works and specifically how seaweed actually works. So it's just, if anybody wants to follow up with me, I share my email on the chat, and let's just be always, let's use science as our guidance, because I'm seeing all kinds of insanity going on in this space. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And using evidence-based science is what we're all trying to do, and while we're bringing all these folks in to talk with us. So Libby and then Kristen.
Hi, thanks so much, and thank you all for your presentations. I have a question for you, Chris, which is I'm trying to figure out kind of where you are on the continuum of actually producing some products from the what do we call it? The CO2 CDR work. I see, I went on the website, I see all the work packages and kind of, but have any papers come out? Anything that we could use to say, oh, this is what they're recommending or conclusions they're drawing?
Yeah, so I'll start with the apology for the website. That is being updated, so that is somewhat out of date, and the next phase is due in the next month or two. So apologies for the website, and that is not up to date. In terms of papers, obviously the information I highlighted is published, and then other related activities are coming out. We are currently in the critical phase of implementation, actually. We have centers going into different field trials to evaluate their monitoring capabilities. We have community engagement processes happening at this point in time. Unfortunately, the nature of ramping up our activities and getting those communities established means that we will have a lot of activity coming out in the last year of our project, but certainly more up-to-date information will be provided through the website in probably a couple of weeks, hopefully. So please do check back there shortly.
Yeah, if you can share maybe with Kelly any resources that are published, that would be excellent.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. I'll forward them on. Kristen.
Thanks. Thanks for the presentations. All of this, hi Chris, this is a question for you on the EIA that you talked about, and just if you could talk a little bit more about, I mean, that's one approach over a relatively short time frame, looking at MCDR generally, and obviously there's many different approaches that are being deployed in many different locations with varying impacts that need to be assessed. And so I was wondering, how you guys are approaching that EIA process in terms of like impacts on different life history stages for species or different habitats or even areas of the water column. And then how you see, other efforts globally to understand, ecosystem environmental impacts, species impacts, and things like that, and how the need for the next steps in terms of like EIA that's bespoke for any method that is going to move beyond.
Yeah, it's a critical question, and it is a very broad-reaching goal set by Ocean Vision to make this EIA framework applicable to all marine CDR techniques. And the bottom line is the approach being taken by Fugro, who are leading this, is to bring their expertise and the EIA approaches used in existing marine infrastructure, i.e. wind turbines, offshore marine activities. They have well-established regulatory guidances that we don't see or don't think of when we're applying this from a kind of a bottom-up approach when we're conducting our own at-sea trials. So I think they're bringing this commercial kind of approach, which is what's considered relevant when people look at those climatically commercially relevant scales. They're translating that into the marine CDR space, making sure that it's going to be applicable to all the different approaches, whether it's coastal, at sea, different kind of scenarios. And at that point, it will then be disseminated to the wider community for input to pick up on all the things you said, because you know, the team as it stands does not have all that knowledge, the capabilities to address all those different points, all the different approaches being put out there. It has to be an open, transparent participatory process that will go through multiple iterative mechanisms. So Integral are leading that consultancy phase. All I'd say, and I'm afraid I can't share anything more than that because it's still kind of in that process of collation. I guess you look to kind of existing EIA type frameworks and think that's where it's going to head, but we need to make it applicable to marine CDR community needs, and this is where your input will be critical. So probably not an answer you're looking for because it's not really an answer, but it's going to be something that you're going to have to contribute to as well, and everyone on this call.
Great. And if there are, I guess, like to the call for papers, if there's, information that's coming out as that team gets underway, on specific impacts that you can share, I think the committee would appreciate that too.
Yeah, and just on that, this isn't an isolation activity. I'm well aware, come to see I've done the OAE EIA framework. There's also Hourglass. Grace and the team have done the fantastic one with ecotoxicological modeling. So there's multiple activities in this space. This is another one that tries to sort of just not put his arms around it, but tries to take a slightly different approach and to hopefully be more applicable. But yeah, certainly make sure that's shared.
Thank you. Lisa.
I have a question for Nyanzi. It's okay. We're taking questions for everybody now?
Yes.
Yeah. I wanted to ask whether there was information about the duration of carbon sequestration that occurs under the aquaculture facilities. Has that been measured? And also, do the waters have to become, or sediments have to be anoxic to sequester that carbon for a long period of time?
Thank you, Lisa. Yes, for the aquaculture area, it got a lot of impact on the environment, but it's a food supply, it's a marine industry, and it's an existing marine industry. You cannot get it, you cannot remove it because people need food. And according to the FAO, there's still 7% of the total population in the world. They are kind of hungry, so we need food, and the food security is a problem because the land potential is limited, but the ocean is vast, so agriculture is needed in the future, and even the UN encourage all the potential countries for aquaculture to develop the marine industry. I mean the aquaculture. Then how to treat the environmental impacts from the aquaculture? For us, I mean, we do the once. While we increase the carbon sink, we try to do the remediation of the problem like eutrophication, hypoxia down there in the culture rafts. Under the culture rafts, I mean, in the bottom water, you got eutrophication, the hypoxia, you got water acidification. By applying upwelling, you can fix it. Theoretically, you're asking about the measurements. No, not really done yet, but we do have the preliminary measurements, and so far, what I can see is the seaweeds. They're about I have to say that 300 petagram per year outputs of the export production of carbon, and half of them is RDOC. That was not really measured before, and we measured it in the practical way. I mean, in the field of aquaculture, and if I apply BCMs, I mean the 4 current pumps into the aquaculture area, it's potentially we can get a much higher outputs for carbon sequestration, not only in the bottom, but also in the dissolved form. I mean RDOC, and the world currents, ocean currents can carry this part of the carbon into deep ocean for long-term storage. As I mentioned, there's about rough estimates of the export in terms of in the form of dissolved organic carbon, DOC, and particulate organic carbon, POC. They're about half and a half. So, but enhance the total production, total carbon fixation, and the sequestration, we could reach much, much higher. I cannot really tell the number, but much, much higher export production and carbon sequestration in the future.
Okay,
That's the most
can I
realistic way
just
so far we
ask,
learned.
my question is really, do you have an estimate of the sequestration time in the coastal waters where the aquaculture is? Is it 20 years or 50 years or
More than
100
that.
years or 200 years?
It's really a good question because nobody have a real answer for that part. But you can have a rough estimate. I mean, the RDOC in the deep water, 2,000 meters, for example, they got an age or resident time of 1,000 years, on average 5,000 years. By analysis, like the mass spectrometry analysis, you can compare the molecule composition of the DOC from the aquaculture area and the DOC molecule composition in the deep water, like 2,000 meters deep in the South China Sea. You could tell, wow, it's really amazing because those outputs of the RDOC from the aquaculture area got a quite similar mass spectrum, similar to that in the water sample from the deep water in the South China Sea. Down there in the, let's see, what we did is about 2,000 meters deep. So then you got a rough idea. So the microbial current pump is working and at a very high efficiency. And this was also tested out by simulated ecosystem experimental study using the Aquitron system in the Dalhousie University in Canada. That was, let's see, 7 years ago. Back in 2018, we have a team joined by American scientists and also Canadian scientists. We work together using that simulated ecosystem to try whether or not MCP is working. And the results is really surprising. Only 1 year, the transformation, microbial transformation of the organic carbon from labile states to refractory states was completed within 1 year. So we are very much encouraged by that experimental study. Then we moved to the field, but the measurements are still relatively, limited. So we cannot really tell how many years it can, the RDOC, yeah. But this is really much more promising than the carbon storage in the soil, in the terrestrial environments. That's for sure. The 100 years, that might be the longest to carbon sequestration in the terrestrial environments. But in the ocean, if once the carbon is turned out down to the deep, it can be stored much longer time than hundreds, maybe thousands. But only according to the structure of the organic matter, the molecule structures, you can tell. That's a kind of refractory, like the crabs.
Nancy, I know that other people have to leave and have to get their questions in, so
okay.
We can continue offline if you like. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have Carrie and then Mahmoud.
Thanks very much, and terrific talks yet again. This is a question for Helen. I was just wondering about the Goan Hub network that you mentioned, and I saw your partnership agreement with the regional hubs, but are you, are all the hubs kind of permitted for OAE trials? And is there sharing of resources beyond data, helping some regions with financial support for trials or other things? Just wondering how that's working a bit.
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, we don't have financial support for any activities. Goan is simply a network. What we try to do with the hubs is each hub's in a very much a different state of of research and capability. For example, the Northeast Atlantic Hub, which I co-chair, is obviously with like the North American Hub, we have a lot of research over the past couple of decades compared to somewhere like the Pacific Islands hubs, which are much newer to measuring and monitoring carbon and carbon dioxide, and also doing a lot of the impact work. So we don't have funding specifically, but what we try to do is share resources. So we have specific workshops and activities. The IAEA has been really great at helping out with those, and they co-fund our secretariat as well as a lot of the activities, and also the Oceanification International Coordination Center. Between them and a number of other communities and partners, we've been working with the Ocean Foundation, for example, to
And
do.
the permitting part as well? Like, are all the hubs
Yes.
permitted for trials or?
No, so we
Okay.
yeah, as far as I know, no. So I think so that's not something Go On specifically gets involved with in terms of permitting, but we're trying to work across hubs to kind of recognize where there's gaps in that sense. So even with the UK, you'd have to go through specific UK national regulations to get a permit for whatever activity you wanted to do. And as I'm sure you're aware, many regions don't have such restricted regulations. So one of the things that we're very interested in making sure happens is equity across that, so that we can bring in local partners and communities to make sure that you don't just get some large industries coming in and trying to get permits and actually then kind of doing that activity in that space, because it's much easier to do than it would be in, say, the US or the UK or Europe.
Right.
So that's something that
That's great.
we're working on, sharing that.
Thanks. Thanks very much.
All right, I guess I will go. I have a question for both Helen and Chris. So, and they're somewhat related. Helen, you mentioned in your recommendations about we need to understand what deployment would look like. And could you expand a little bit on that? Are you talking about, field trials or deployment? And what do you see as some promising examples of that, and how much work do you think needs to be done to address that? And related to that, as we are thinking about deployment, Chris, you talked about community of practice and Carbon Business Council. So in terms of looking at deployment, we're also looking at, is anybody looking at workforce issues as we are talking about scaling, training and all of that, as we look at these deployment scenarios? So first, Helen, and then Chris, if you could connect those two dots for me, please.
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. So one of the things we've had come up a couple of times when we're trying to communicate the issue of MCDR is, how do you describe to someone the scale that's either going to be at trial stage or sort of pilot trial stage, or actually what does this look like if we were to deploy at climate relevant scales? So you hear the numbers being bandied around about like 1% of the surface ocean would need to be sucked through a dissolved direct ocean carbon capture every year to actually make any sort of climate relevant deployment removal of carbon dioxide, and things like 100-meter swaths of the ocean, of the coastal ocean, would have to be covered in macroalgae to make a climate relevant sequestration of carbon. But realistically, is that what it's going to look like, right? So how do we explain to someone, either a national policymaker or a marine spatial planner, what does that scale actually look like in reality? When for the UK, we have these global carbon budgets, and in that we have, like, for the next 10-20 years, what they're going to budget the carbon is going to, how they're going to budget that carbon. And at the moment, CDR features as sort of capturing maybe 5% of the carbon in that carbon budget, and there's no marine in that at the moment at all. But that's the sort of information that they're going to need to include in the UK's carbon budget or the national determined contributions. Is, do I go and is scaling actually just a combination of I'm going to do some direct ocean capture here because this is where this space is best to do that. Or I'm going to do some ocean alkalinity here near this coral reef because that's the best place to do it. And how can I pick and choose that to within my marine space to actually manage that, and what does that look like? And then on the larger, grander scale, some of these things are going to have to be done in international waters. So what does that scale actually look like? Is it going to be putting a huge amount of iron into the Southern Ocean, the whole Southern Ocean? Where does that iron come from? And the ships, the logistics for actually making that happen at that scale? Those are still questions that I think we are starting to tackle and to look at in the research field, and modeling is fundamental as part of that. But there's also a huge amount of societal questions that we need to be asking in terms of how do we plan for that, and where does all this resource and energy requirements in a kind of life cycle analysis type of assessment take place? And so there are some really strong moves forward in terms of life cycle assessments. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but there's some good progress being made in kind of combining those aspects. But I think that's something that we really need to try and push a bit more in as we develop the technologies and the environmental impact assessments moving forward. Maybe we're not there at answering those questions yet, but I do think we need to have those in our minds as we are looking at answering those questions. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I disagree with everything that Helen just said. I mean, so I don't want to sort of reiterate that, but in terms of the workforce issue, you're absolutely right. I think we're seeing a massive growth in publications, commercial scientific interest in this sector. We are not perhaps queued up to respond as a kind of a training network and through our universities. It takes time for graduates to come through, certainly to get the experience and exposure to what the sector needs. I think we also need to recognize that this isn't just a scientific question. It's not just a scientific need, a scientific workforce. It's a social understanding. It's that broader context for implementation, as well as the legal aspects, as well as the markets. You know, it is cross-cutting, it is interdisciplinary, and that whole sector needs to be attuned to the unique needs of marine carbon dioxide removal. You know, we have to bring different sectors into this area. We have to work collectively and collaborate. And I think this is kind of the message I want to highlight in the talk, is that we have to communicate. We have to understand what the companies who wish to deploy this are trying to do. We have to understand what the governments who might be looking at this as a means of dealing with issues or their NDCs want to achieve. And we have to understand what the technical and economic viabilities and perceptions are. I think there are recognized gaps in our capabilities at this point in time. PhD students, postdocs, researchers are coming into space, many of whom are going into the sector with knowledge. So we, as the scientific community, have that responsibility to sort of impart that authority, that knowledge of how to do this in the right way and the considerations, but we can't do it alone. We have to recognize the limits of our understanding and make sure that other sectors are coming into this play. And, you know, there are many great entities doing that. You know, this is not something that's not happening. It is happening. I think we need to recognize there's a lot of work to be done if we're going to achieve, or if we're going to work towards the potential utilization of marine carbon dioxide as a resource. You know, that's going to take not years, it's probably going to take decades. I think a long time to get there to those sorts of scales. And the question is, do we have that time as a global community? So a lot of work's got to happen in the near future.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chris, Nyanju, and Helen. Thanks for staying on a little extra, Helen. I know you need to run. This has been extremely informative, and if we have any additional questions, which I imagine we will, hopefully we can communicate that via email for the time being. So thanks so much for joining us. You can stay on, and please do stay on. Next, we're going to play a pre-recorded presentation from Philip Boyd. He's with the University of Tasmania. And this is part of this discussion, but since he couldn't be here and we couldn't ask him questions, I thought we would let the others go and then we can start with us. So please stay tuned and let's hear from Phil.
Good afternoon, Kelly and Scott from Australia. Philip Boyd here, and in line with the director we had, we'll give you some perspectives from Australia that we've been discussing. They're not all necessarily Australian in content, and they they go slightly beyond MCR science into some other issues around the markets and also education. Recently, we provided a guide for policymakers for the UN Ocean Envoy, Peter Thompson, that was presented at the Blue Zone in the UN Ocean Conference in Nice. As we see it, the key role for marine CDR is to be part of a portfolio that we refer to as 1 Earth CDR. In the slide here, you can see that at present, the land and ocean sinks are taking up anthropogenic CO2. If we only focus on land-based CDR, then we will see significant effluxes of CO2 coming out of the ocean, and indeed also still out of the land reservoirs. So we need a more holistic approach to CDR, and that has to involve both the land and the ocean reservoirs. So this is from a recent piece that's in review in Environmental Research Letters. In terms of what we might term biological MCDR, we're seeing a number of new critiques on the terminology used around the biological carbon pump. Recent paper by Andre Visser, but one last year by Ivy Franger, talking about the importance of the return pathway of respired DIC and how it's the key factor that's really driving the connection between the biological carbon pump and alteration in atmospheric CO2. So we see these as being very important and influential documents, given that a number of approaches involve some sort of manipulation of the biological carbon pump. And sticking on the biological carbon pump, then recent work we've been doing in my lab using what are being called enhanced biogeochemical Argo floats with additional sensors where we have particle imagery and where we can get 14 size classes of particle information, is providing useful data. In the slide here on the left-hand panel is a Southern Ocean bloom. We're able to actually then look at the particle dynamics, the sinking, the fragmentation, and we're also able, when we recover the float, then to get the corresponding imagery. So I think certainly for biological MCDR, this will really enhance things with monitoring, reporting, and verification, and also looking at side effects. Clearly, there are still major issues around the ability for BGC Argo to provide MRV for chemical MCDR. Moving on then to discussions around chemical MCDR, and based on a very extensive series of presentations that were given at the Liège Colloquium in Belgium in late May and early June earlier this year. There was a very strong presence from Dalhousie, from Planetary, and from another of other groups. The consensus, I think, in the room that day across certainly the scientists was that given the reaction stoichiometry for most of the methods, upscaling is really going to be an issue, whether we're using olivine or sodium hydroxide or other methods. I think we're probably looking at tens to hundreds of megatons in upscaling, but certainly not the gigatons that may be needed to counteract residual hard to abate emissions, which is again the sort of language coming out of Summary for Policymakers from the IPCC AR6 2022 paper. So certainly some sobering things to think about there. Moving on then to looking at some of the companies, I do this with my hat on as co-chair of the UN GAZAMP Working Group 41 on MCDR. Certainly the Israeli startup GigaBlue would appear to be, if you like, the new kind of running tide that people are looking up to and trying to emulate. They secured a big deal from Skies 50 Aviation. They're probably worth $30 to $40 million over the next few years. They're working with NIWA, the National Institute of Water and Atmosphere in New Zealand, and from discussions I've had offline with some of the scientists there's certainly some concerns about some of the methodologies they're using, in particular trying to use acoustics for MRB for their engineered particles. But certainly we'll be keeping a very close eye on this company. They're using the invested money, as I say, of 30 or 40 million in advance purchase options to start to push ahead with patents, and also push ahead with using the Pura Group in Europe to do a sort of a portfolio on their MRV. I read both documents. I find them to be less than convincing. The report from Pura covers 90% of the bases, but the 10% they leave out are the absolutely critical aspects of this technique that need attention. Moving on then, we're starting to see an increasing number of articles that are very critical of MCDR. I see these as being somewhat emotional and certainly not the sort of agnostic reporting that we should be seeing from scientists. For example, the DOSI, the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative, wrote a manuscript. I provided comments on it, really to try and make it a little bit more objective, but certainly the first draft was very poor, scientifically speaking. And so I think this is a concern, given that we want a level playing field to really look at the candidate methods for MCDR and evaluate them objectively as scientists. Another issue we're having in Australia and probably other places is this growing conflation of carbon capture and storage with carbon dioxide removal, given that the last two COPs have had at least 500 industry advocates for CCS. I see this as being very dangerous. The box that the text I've marked up here in the box below uses almost identical language to that from the summary for policymakers, IPCC, Working Group 3, AR6 report. And with that sort of overlap, it becomes, I think, very challenging for government departments and organisations, particularly in Australia. There really are some issues around here that we're trying to resolve, and we're actually trying to work with them to run a sort of a review on terminology, which I think is necessary. Another key issue is the continuing colonisation of the ocean. It started off with mangroves and other things in the near shore. Then they're talking fjords, and now this recent paper has sort of commodified the ocean's biological carbon pump. We've actually, particularly with people being keen to add natural carbon stocks to their necessarily determined contributions, we've actually just written a response to this piece, which we submitted recently, and actually did it with some terrestrial CDR people who, again, are concerned about how one can magically begin to manage a forest and suddenly that carbon can appear on your ledger for your NDC. But certainly concerned here with some of the examples they use from Micronesia and Polynesia in terms of how you can add an eye-wateringly large amount of carbon onto your NDC. So it's another issue that's concerning us. The final two, again, the carbon markets are not fit for purpose for any form of CDR. This was a comment we wrote a little while ago, but really pointing out that we need to have something that's actually custom built for CDR and the complexities of CDR. It has to take in how reliable these approaches are. It needs a warranty approach. It also has to take into account how durable they are. So that's another thing that needs to be resolved. And finally, we've been pushing in Australia CDR education. We ran our first week-long school. We had 50 participants. We had a very wide range of different lectures and practicals that were given, and we're currently talking with folks in the US about passing on some of that knowledge. We'd run another virtual school again in the coming month or so. So my 10 minutes are up, so thank you. And again, apologies I couldn't be up. The time zones were not in my favor. Okay, thank you. Any questions, maybe put them in the chat or an email. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Scott. Bye.
Thank you, Philip. Yeah, so committee members, we can compile any questions or comments that we have, and we'll follow up with an email. So thanks so much, Philip, for giving that presentation to us. And then our final recording is from Peter McCready with Blue Carbon Lab. And this is one of the lightning talks that we ran out of time for on Monday, but it is a great one. Please do stay tuned with us for 5 more minutes.
Hi, my name is Peter McCready, and I am the director of the Blue Carbon Lab at RMIT University's Centre for Nature Positive Solutions. Delighted to be given this invitation to speak before the MCDR Standing Committee and summarise where blue carbon is at, the state of science after 15 or so years of research. I really wish I could have been there live to deliver this. It just overlaps with the International Blue Carbon Working Group meeting here in Sri Lanka. Let's get underway. So, quick recap. The term blue carbon was coined back in 2009, and it refers to carbon that is captured and stored by coastal and marine ecosystems. But since at this event, many of you are talking about other types of ocean carbon, I'll try to be more precise, which is really that it's biologically driven carbon fluxes and storage in coastal vegetated ecosystems that are amenable to management. Blue carbon ecosystems traditionally are the coastal wetlands such as tidal marshes and mangrove forests, and also undersea systems like seagrass meadows and, to some unknown extent, seaweeds. Although what constitutes blue carbon is a matter of healthy debate, tidal mudflats, oyster reefs, coralline algae, and some other systems have properties that mean they could be included in blue carbon. Blue carbon ecosystems are regarded for having very high carbon burial efficiency and long-term sequestration. They can store carbon over millennial timescales. There's really high demand for blue carbon from governments and private sector, and the demand far outweighs the supply. Policy has moved very fast. For example, many nations have included blue carbon in their NDCs. More carbon credit methodologies are emerging at a great pace. There's been an exponential growth in the science. There's been more than 15,000 scientists that have authored papers on blue carbon. And also the term blue carbon has been trending upwards in popular media, according to Google Trends. This is where blue carbon credits are being generated around the world. About 80 projects, mostly mangrove systems, and also mostly around the equator in developing nations. Most blue carbon credits are being developed by for-profit companies, and the transport sector is the largest buyer of blue carbon credits. The amount of blue carbon within planet Earth exceeds 30 billion tonnes, which span across more than 185 million hectares. Avoided emissions and restoration of blue carbon ecosystems could abate greenhouse gas emissions to the equivalent of about 3% of global emissions per annum. And based on the previous slide, it means we've barely scratched the surface in terms of what is possible, in terms of the amount of activity we've done against what is possible. Just for the sake of putting a number on it, there's probably about 99.5% still to go, and that's not including the non-conventional blue carbon ecosystems. So what's holding us back? Well, the barriers are social. For example, getting communities on board and working out how we share benefits equitably with coastal communities. Governance, clarifying carbon rights, who owns the carbon? Is it the government? Is it Indigenous groups? Is it private landholders or some other group? Finance, restoring wetlands has high costs. How do we make sure that blue carbon projects can be done cost effectively, or better yet, profitably? And maybe add in co-benefits to that as being one potential solution, but also a helpful segue to something else I wanted to point out, which is that blue carbon ecosystems are much more than carbon. They protect coasts against extreme weather events. In many parts of the world, a mangrove forest can mean the difference between life and death. Here we are on the shorelines of Negombo in Sri Lanka, where we know that extreme weather events, tsunamis, storm surge have had incredible impact in terms of loss of lives and infrastructure. These ecosystems also provide nursery grounds for fish that underpin our fisheries. That's valuable nutrition for billions of people around the planet. They bolster biodiversity, critical habitat, some of the rarest species on the planet. Also, important food and habitat for some charismatic species like turtles. They help remove pollutants from our coastlines, including plastics, heavy metals, harmful bacteria, viruses, and so on. That's my 5 minutes. Apologies if that was a lot of information in a short amount of time. I hope it was useful. Thank you for your time. You can find more information about my group's work, which is RMIT's Centre for Nature Positive Solutions, and also the Blue Carbon Lab. And I will close with one thing, which might seem counterproductive to my own interest, but in Blue Carbon that is, which is that I think ocean alkalinity enhancement deserves the attention that you're giving it and more. The scale of possibilities, they're immense. And ocean alkalinity brings me a lot of hope, but blue carbon is also important. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Pete. And again, if you have questions for him, I can follow up with him in an email. So that brings us to the end of our public session. I think we have one quick slide to show. This has been an amazing week of information gathering for us. Yes, these are all the folks that have joined us this week. We thank you all for sharing your time. It takes a long time to prepare these presentations and be with us and stay on for questions. We just really appreciate you, and the work of our committee is reliant on folks like you donating your time and your expertise to enrich our conversations. So just want to say thank you. And if you're a committee member, you get a 30-minute break today, and then we'll join back in closed session at 2 p.m. Eastern. So thanks so much. This was fantastic.
Thank you.